All right, so yeah, so if you keep looking at the slides, it goes on to implementing nested components, right? So that all the widgets render differently, right? The headings render differently. The YouTube renders differently, and so on and so forth, right? Each widget ideally would be implemented in its own component, with its own template, with its own code and whatnot. So let's do that. Let's play around with a simple one, the heading component, right? So let's implement a heading component. So let's see, views, and under widget, we might implement the widget heading component. Right, so let's stop this, and let's see, where are we? In widget, very good. And in here, we're going to create another component called widget dash heading, right? And this is going to create the widget heading component, right, with its own HTML and whatnot, right? So there it is. There it is. And what we'd like to be able to do, right, is that there's our default content for our template. What we'd like to be able to do is that as we're iterating over the components, right, instead of just printing out this text, what I'd like to be able to do is that depending on the type, right, we would like to be able to render either a heading component or a YouTube component and implement it in those templates, right? So we could, let's get just do a very simple example here. Instead of widget text, what we could do here is use this brand new widget heading component that we just declared, right, that has that tag. If we go back and look at the rendering, we need to start it. We need to start it from the server, starting version control, to do terminal. So this is ng-serve. Okay. You done? Come on. Okay. So notice that it's rendering the content, the static content for that particular heading, right? So what we'd like to be able to do is that this heading actually should have a handle on the current widget that is iterating, because each widget knows the type, it knows the size of the heading, right, depending on the type, right? And depending on that, it should render either H1, H2, H3, and whatnot. Yes? So we would like to pass to the widget heading this widget instance, pass it along to the nested component, right? So that in the component, we would like to have a variable here where we can hold the current widget. Okay, and there it is. It loaded it. And we would like to pass it as an input, right, from outside, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to tag this as an input. We're going to decorate it as an input that somebody else is going to provide this as an argument to this component. Okay, and notice that it included. There it is, input. Right. So that we can declare here. We can declare here a widget as an input that's going to be tied, is going to be bound to the variable widget over here. Okay, so that inside here, inside of the HTML, instead of having this widget heading works, right? We could do is render the widget and then maybe the size. Okay, why is this stopping? Continue. There it is, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? These are values that are in the widget object that we're iterating over, right? Which I have access within the inner nested components, right? So this is the beauty of Angular and React, of being able to create these reusable components, right? And create a well-defined API, right, interface that I can just pass it the data, right? And then internally it behaves any which way you want it, right? In this particular case, we don't just want to render the size. What we want to do is that we want to use the size, right, to decide whether we want to render either H1, right, is some content here, H1 here, or render it as H2, or render as H3, or as H4, right? Notice that now it's rendering everything, right, multiple times, right? But we'd like to choose one of them, based on the so this actually we want the text, right? Widget text, right? In each one of these, but we want to pick out just one of them depending on the size, right? So there it is. So it's always saying the text, right? That's in each one of the widget instances. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to use I've documented here that we can use the ng switch directive, right, to kind of create like a switch case statement, right, that based on the value of a variable, we can choose one from a collection of templates, of choices of templates, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to here we're going to say, depending on the widget size, I would like to choose one of these, right? If the size, right, if the size matches 1, I want this particular DOM, make it to the DOM, right? If instead, let's copy that. If instead the size is 2, I want to render as 2. If instead is 3, I want to render the H3. Or if it's 4, I'll render it the H4. And I don't want the size down here. Make sense? So if I go back and I look at the, now it renders correctly, right? Widget hello world. There it is, right? Widget list. This hello world is rendering as a 2. This is as a 3, and this is as a 4. Okay, that makes sense, right? This same mechanism of ng widget, you're going to be able to use it here when you're iterating. As you're iterating, right? Depending on the type of the widget, you'll render a widget heading, or a widget YouTube, or a widget image, or a YouTube whatever, right? You'll use the same exact mechanism we looked at for rendering the H1s, H2, H3, right? You'll use it to render the different types of components. And I've given you here documented as part of the here are several examples on creating a paragraph widget, right? Adding a pipe. Since the YouTube widget and the image widget use dynamic URLs, and those URLs are by default considered to be harmful or untrusted, right? So you have to specifically vote or tell Angular to trust these URLs, or the URL to a YouTube video, the URL to some image. Since they're dynamic, right? It is by default untrusted content, right? So you have to. So here's an example. I'm using pipes for you to be able to vote that the URL or the source for a URL for an iframe, or since YouTube uses iframe, so here's an example of how to use it to declare that this URL is trusted. Right? It is okay to use this URL, go out to YouTube and load this entire web iframe, right, in our pages. So this walks you how to use that. All right. So I encourage you to take a look at the at this presentation. All right. All right. I'm gonna leave it here.